Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Robert Adams, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is leading aircraftman Riley Elmes. Today we remember the Australian and British prisoners of war who died at the Sandakan prisoner of war camp, or as a result of the Sandakan Death Marches during the Second World War. The Sandakan Death Marches remain the greatest war atrocity committed against Australians. In 1942, the Japanese sent prisoners of war from Singapore to build an airstrip at Sandakan in Borneo. Over time, their rations were reduced and physical abuse increased. In January 1945, with Allied forces advancing towards Borneo, the Japanese began marching Australian and British prisoners of war westwards to Ranao through the island's rugged interior. The weak and malnourished prisoners staggered along jungle tracks for more than 260 kilometres. Many died en route, their bodies never recovered. Those too weak to continue were killed by the guards. Of the 2,500 prisoners of war originally held at Sandakan, only 6, all Australians, managed to survive the war. Today we remember the prisoners held in the Sandakan prisoner of war camp. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. We warmly welcome the family of Private William John Beer, whose story will be told shortly. This evening, we are honoured to acknowledge Her Excellency Mrs. Vicky Trudell, British High Commissioner to Australia, accompanied by Brigadier Nigel Best, United Kingdom Defence Advisor. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, I now invite you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh let us rejoice, for we are one and free. With golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is got by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who've given their lives for us during war and on operations over more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private William John Beer. William Beer was born in Bunbury, Western Australia on the 7th of February 1917, the second of 4 sons born to George and Margaret Beer. Known as Bill, he grew up in Bunbury alongside 3 brothers and 4 sisters. His father George had enlisted for service in the First World War, serving in the 11th Battalion before he was severely wounded and returned home in August 1918. Bill attended the local St Mary's Convent School until the age of 15. He went on to live in Bunbury, where he worked as a plasterer, before enlisting for service with the 2nd Australian Imperial Force on the 10th of August 1940. Private Bill Beer began training, and in late November transferred to the 2nd 4th Machine Gun Battalion. The battalion had just been raised as one of the support units for the 8th Division. Men from across the state came together at Northam Military Camp, east of Perth, where they undertook initial training. In July 1941, the 2nd 4th moved to Adelaide, as more of the 8th Division was deployed up north. By October, it was in Darwin with the 23rd Brigade. Around this time, Beer was found absent without leave and fined. Told of their move just before Christmas, Beer and his battalion left Darwin on the 30th of September, sailing via Port Moresby. Following a Japanese attack on Rabaul, New Britain, the convoy turned around and sailed to Sydney and then Fremantle. At Fremantle, Beer was again found absent without leave and fined. Sailing under escort, the convoy carrying the 2nd 4th machine gunners finally reached Singapore at the end of January 1942. It was not long before it was in action. After days of air raids, the Japanese attacked Singapore on the 8th of February. Deployed to different units, the 2nd 4th companies were quickly in action. But by the 10th of February, the Japanese had captured the island's west coast. 5 days later, the British forces were pushed back to a defensive line protecting the city. The battle was virtually over, and on the 15th of February, Lieutenant General Arthur Percival surrendered Singapore. The machine gunners suffered heavily. In the week preceding the surrender of Singapore, the 2nd Fourth had 137 men killed or missing, 106 men wounded, and 24 described as having shell shock. These casualties constituted almost 1/3 of the battalion. Worse was to follow, with the battalion held in Japanese prisoner of war camps for the next 3 years. Beer was admitted to camp hospital at Changi, suffering from malaria, but recovered. It was not until the 28th of March, 1943, that he left Changi, having become a part of E-Force. Originally consisting of 500 British and 500 Australian prisoners of war, E-Force left Changi on the 28th of March, 1943. The men first disembarked at Bahala Island, where they were accommodated in a prisoner of war camp. Conditions were described as pretty good, and the prisoners were allowed to swim under the supervision of guards. In early June, preparations were ready to move to the mainland. 8 prisoners escaped during the night. On reaching Sandakan, the remaining prisoners were split into groups that the Japanese kept separated, with severe punishment for anyone found talking to the men in different groups. At Sandakan, the men worked to construct an airfield and prisoner of war camps. In October, E-Force was amalgamated with the 1,500 men of B-Force. The number of guards at Sandakan was increased and the process of stockpiling food began. Allied air raids on Sandakan began in September 1944. The airfield was bombed and strafed, and about 60 Japanese aircraft on the ground were destroyed. On Christmas Day 1944, America B-24 Liberators finally put the airfield out of commission. The prisoners, now in very poor health, minimal supplies of food, and brutal treatment at the hands of the Taiwanese guards and Japanese soldiers exacerbated the impact of tropical diseases. The death rate climbed. On the 28th of January 1945, the first forced march began, starting at Sandakan and ending near the village of Ranau, some 260 kilometres to the west. 405 prisoners were selected who were thought fit enough to carry baggage and supplies for the Japanese battalions relocating to the western coast. The prisoners were all malnourished or suffering serious illness and had meagre rations for the trip. Those who collapsed from exhaustion or sickness were killed or left to die. A second march of 536 prisoners set out from Sandakan to Ranau on the 29th of May 1945. Among them was Bill Beer. Again, the conditions, the strain and lack of food took a heavy toll on the already sick and weakened men. Bill Beer is recorded of having died of illness, most likely malaria, on the 14th of June 1945, approximately 4 miles east of Boto during this death march. He was 28 years old. Today he is commemorated at the Labuan Memorial in Malaysia. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, amongst 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is today displayed by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private William John Beer, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able, I now invite you to please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old. as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.